Horror is a difficult genre to get right because it takes a lot of effort to get an audience invested so they can feel the genre's effect. Instead of simply relying on jump scares and creepy concepts, horror needs to get you psychologically and create an atmosphere in which you believe that there is a real threat to the characters' lives. Vicariously, you experience the characters' fear and sympathize with their struggles. You wish for their safety and are anxious to see how they will escape from the situation, if at all. The threat isn't always the monster that lurks in the dark. If anything, it stems from the victim's reactions and your desire for everything to turn out okay. That is true horror, and is what cements movies like The Shining, The Exorcist, Misery, and The Babadook as staples of the horror genre. Anime, on the other hand, isn't exactly well known for its horror pieces, which is odd considering Japanese horror is famous for its effectiveness. There are a few horror anime, like Higurashi and Another, but they're pretty few and far between, and most aren't exactly good, per se. I suppose the reason why it's harder to scare people through horror animation is because there's a bigger disconnect between what is happening on screen and the mind of the viewer. Deep down, we recognize that what we're watching isn't real, especially because we're watching literal moving pictures and incredibly unrealistic character designs. In order to succeed, anime has to really emphasize the psychological aspect of horror through strong character writing and a believable atmosphere. In honor of Halloween, and in the honor of being original by not making a countdown of the best anime to watch on this particular holiday, these are 3 episodes of anime that displayed an understanding of what makes horror work, even though the shows themselves may not always fall into the horror genre. They are in no particular order, and there will be minor spoilers for each entry, so I will put some timestamps in the description below if anyone needs it. With that out of the way, let's get started. Firstly, let's start off with a quick honorable mention. Gatchaman Crowd's Insight, Episode 8, Cluster. While this episode is very terrifying in its own right, it's terrifying because you don't know what's going on, so I don't really want to spoil it for anyone. So, go ahead and just watch Gatchaman Crowd's Insight to get to this episode. Trust me, it'll be worth it. Number 1. Fullmetal Alchemist 2003, Episode 8, The Philosopher's Stone. In this episode, Edward is horribly upset over Nina's death and begins investigating one of her potential murderers, a serial killer who mainly targets women. Unbeknownst to him, we know the killer is Scar and are held in suspense over when Edward will figure that out. Winry arrives to surprise the Elric brothers and gets captured by this man, and then Ed gets captured looking for her. With his metal arm removed and the rest of his body tied to a chair, 12-year-old Ed has to face off against a psychotic man with a meat cleaver, Barry the Chopper. Barry has a horribly disturbing backstory. His mind is completely unhinged, and his killing spree began with his wife. He legitimately enjoys killing others, and the fact that his motivations aren't ever made clear makes him even more terrifying. He's also quite intelligent. He knows about Edward's transmutation abilities, he evaded the law, and managed to capture and torture women for an undefined amount of time. That is implied to be, quite the long time. It also helps that his voice acting is perfect, at least in the English dub. For a mostly one-off role, Jerry Jewell did a fantastic job selling this psychotic serial killer, and I bought every minute. However, a great villain is revealed through the hero's reaction, and this is where the episode truly shines. Even though this is a flashback episode and you know Edward is going to live, you actually question whether he's going to live or die in this sequence. The combination of the music, the sharp direction, Barry chasing Edward around with a meat cleaver, Edward's facial expressions, and Edward being deprived of his alchemy abilities all tied together into a tense, terrifying package. When Edward reattaches his arm, for instance, his audible screams allow Barry to locate him again, which adds to the terror. The only way Edward can fight back makes it easier for the psychotic murderer to find him. The scariest part of the episode is what happens when Edward is rescued. Unbeknownst to him and the audience, Al arrives with the other state alchemists and he finds Edward. Edward, thinking Al is Barry, lashes out with his newly retrieved arm with a strike that would kill any ordinary man. The fact that Edward was so blinded with fear that he couldn't tell that he was striking out at his own brother reaffirms just how terrifying a scenario this was for him. I mean, imagine being so caught up in a horrifying moment that you don't perceive reality anymore, to the point where you can't even recognize your own brother. When I first watched this sequence, I had to pause the video and take a breather. It is, to this day, one of the most intense episodes I've ever watched in any medium. While it doesn't haunt my nightmares, this episode demonstrates that the victim's reaction is the key to making a villain intimidating. Number 2. Re:Zero, Starting Life in Another World, Episode 7, Natsuki Subaru's Restart. Next up is an episode from an anime that's fairly recent and focuses on being scary in a different way. Re:Zero had its moments of fear previously, like Subaru's encounter with Elsa in episode 2, but this is the first episode to truly capitalize on Subaru's horrifying situation. It finally shows how Subaru's return by death power affects his actions and mental state and makes his character feel all the more human and relatable. While this episode is great for more reasons than its effective fear factor, there is no underestimating how well this episode captures a fear of isolation by showing Subaru act completely differently from his usual happy and carefree self. Subaru discovers that practically everyone in the Rosewald mansion is against him being there and dies by Rem's hand. He wakes up in his checkpoint, terrified of Rem and Rom, and then we cut straight to Amelia trying to comfort him. Subaru tries to tell her about his power, only for time to freeze. Oh, and some insidious entity creeps into his body and literally grabs his heart. He then pushes Amelia away, and the rest of the episode follows Subaru through one of his loneliest and most desolate periods throughout the show, ending with him gathering up the strength to try again. The episode brings how alienating Subaru's power is to the forefront, and shows how Subaru keeping his feelings to himself negatively affects him. He spent the entire show dying and returning, particularly in the Rosewald mansion, and the realization that no one in the mansion trusts him is devastating. He feels as though he can't fix things, that he's reached a dead end, and is afraid that his dead end will happen again, and again, and again. Basically, Subaru is trapped in a situation where he is truly alone, and the belief that you're completely alone inspires an incredible fear. The only relief he receives is that Betty offers him a bit of a safe haven, but that doesn't change the fact that Subaru can't tell anyone about his situation. It also helps that the animation, directing, and music really help drive the fear home. The show's trademark creepy choir is used very effectively when needed, and the emotions captured through the angles and cinematography make the episode feel all the more emotionally tangible. My favorite piece of directing is during Subaru's nightmare about Rem. The upward shot and focus on Subaru's slow walking gives off the impression that he's trying to get away with much difficulty. The fact that the shot is from behind him also shows that he's being chased, and the switch to seeing the object of Subaru's fear actually being in front of him is shocking to both the viewer and Subaru himself. It's good stuff, and adds to what is already a fantastic episode. Number 3. Shiki, Episode 12, 12th Decay. It's been years since I've watched this episode, no exaggeration. Though, despite that, this episode was so terrifying that I dropped the series and was unable to properly sleep for a long time. The plot of this episode is fairly basic. Natsuno, one of the main characters, or quasi-main characters considering the show we're talking about, discovers that his presumably dead best friend became a vampire and is drinking his blood throughout the nights, slowly killing him. It further developed what the vampires are like and how ruthless they have to be to survive. They're established as forces to be reckoned with since they drink your blood while you sleep, and since you're unconscious it is impossible to stop them. That preys on both the fear of the unknown and the fear of the dark. The show has revealed how vampires feed before. If anything, there's an even scarier attack on a woman who the main doctor tried to save earlier in the show. However, this was the episode where the idea of what vampires actually did to their victims truly sank in. The idea that Natsuno's best friend's thirst for blood drives him to drink Natsuno's blood in his sleep is absolutely terrifying. As ridiculous as that fear is, and trust me, I've long since gotten over it, the fact that I was able to believe something that outlandish was real and was a potential threat reveals Shiki's unnerving ability to get into his viewers' heads. So, those are 3 episodes of anime that scared me. Hope you guys have a happy Halloween and share what episode of anime scared you the most in the comments. Or talk about how much of a wuss I am. Either works. Anyway, I'll see you guys later.